Well, I'm pleased to rise to speak to this budget, as there's a number of important issues in regard to my portfolios, the state of Queensland and my electorate of Maroochydore. I will just make a reference, though, to the Coldrake report and the Let the Sun Shine In recommendations that have not been tabled yet in legislation before the House. I can't refer to those that are within the legislation just tabled in accordance with the parliamentary rules until that bill is debated. But we're still waiting for the provisions, particularly around the 30-day release of cabinet records. And I wonder how much effort's going into how the government can find new bolt holes where they can bury stuff, because they've used some of the committees and abused the committee process to not be transparent, but to bury stuff, where the 30-year rule of committees has been taken and abused, where there are committee chairs and their Labor backbench hench people who have deliberately used the weight of their numbers to prevent minutes being released that show the efforts of the non-government members to have greater scrutiny on this government. This Labor government has abused the committee process, which was originally set up to bring about greater transparency, and now has these Labor majority members not only gagging debate within those committees, but threatening those members if they dare to talk about what's happening in the committees, if they haven't released the minutes, threatening them with a breach of ethics.
Members, I'll start warning people straight away. I want to hear what the member for Maroochydore has to say. Member for Maroochydore, have the call.
And this is a key integrity matter that this government doesn't want to address, because they're happy to try and use committees and abuse the process to bury and gag members, and then threaten members who've tried to raise issues within those processes if they dare speak about it, because they've been legally gagged behind closed doors. This budget proves Queenslanders can't trust the Palaszczuk Labor government to fix the chaos and crisis impacting their lives every day. Revenue's never been higher, but services have never been worse due to the mismanagement of this Labor government. The Palaszczuk government does not deliver on its promises to Queenslanders, and Queenslanders can no longer trust this government. We know that the Palaszczuk Labor government has spent at least $423 million on the Big Four consulting firms in the last 5 years. We know that this amounts to—
Sorry, member from Maroochydore. Member for Logan, member for Southern Downs, member for Mermaid Beach. Cease your conversation across the chamber. Member for Maroochydore, have the call.
The government spent at least $423 million on the Big Four consulting firms in the last 5 years, and that amounts to $234,000 every single day. The Coldrake report said that, and I quote, "Part of the problem is an identifiable loss of capacity in the public service, which has been accelerated by what is now an over-reliance on external contractors and consultants." End quote. Now, an example is KPMG's engagement for the Cross River Rail project, and I'll table an excerpt from their website where they talk about evaluating the models for the project, and this has effectively put them in the box seat for the procurement phase. I'm sure it helped them get the job to manage the construction. Now they claim to be locked in, according to the way this website reads, for the operations phase. Is it for a full 30 years of the PPP contract? There are many questions to be answered, and I'll table that excerpt. That's why the LNP, under our leader David Crisafulli, has announced a plan to ensure that we focus on having independent consultancies that don't suck the capacity from the public sector, but actually enhance and ensure that the key focus is in having that capacity within the public service. Though I will make mention of it, I think that the state government still doesn't get it in the way that they've outsourced a lot of the capacity into the private sector, into the Big Four. We noticed that of the Director-Generals, 1 in 5 actually came from one of the Big Four consulting firms, and there will be many others in the Deputy Director roles as well. But 3 of the Director-Generals were with KPMG, either as partners, advisors or directors. One of the Director Generals was Deloitte, and then there's also those who were with PwC who are Director Generals, and there's a raft of the others as Director Generals. What we're saying is we want to ensure that the public sector is independent, that it continues to serve Queenslanders first, and they're supported not only in their professional aims but key and foremost with the service of Queenslanders, because Queenslanders deserve that. We want the best public service in Australia. We want to ensure that they have the resources that they need to capably manage projects such as the Cross River Rail. Now, let me just address some other aspects in regard to funding, and I welcome the additional funding from the Department of Premier and Cabinet and the Department of Justice and Attorney General to implement a number of the integrity recommendations of Coldrake, but we're still to see the detail of how that's to be rolled out. We want to see that, and certainly want to see when Cabinet documents process will be released. I also believe that we need to see a reform, as our leader has said, with the estimates process, but also the committee process, so that they act transparently and don't gag members behind closed doors. Ministerial staff. Well, let's just talk about this, because the government's priorities are clearly with their own media and marketing, where we've seen a 9% increase in communications, media and marketing within the government ministerial staff. Ministerial staff, a 14% increase. And yet police have decreased in Queensland since the time of the last election by 0.6%. Disability support workers by 11%. That's where this government's priorities are. They're not employing the additional police that they promised, and approved as not an actual police officer to go out and respond to the increasing incidents of youth crime and other crime that our communities are bearing the brunt of. What we've seen, in fact, has been a reduction in police numbers, going back by 72 police since the 2020 election. This Labor government also claims that they had increased social housing by 4,000 in the last 8 years. But the audited figures show that there's only been a net increase of 1,395. Now, that's a big difference. And so when they start to talk about big targets again, we have to look at the reality of what they've done, and they're far short. While we have record numbers of people who are homeless, this government can't even keep their promise about what they said they'd deliver in the last few years in budgets. They're talking about future budgets and have failed to release and realise their targets in previous budgets. Social housing grew just 2.7%, while the Queensland population grew 12%, and the social housing waiting list has ballooned. And in the private sector, we see that there has been a failure to meet targets with the release of new land. So, with this Labor government, they promise big as to what they'll do, and then they mislead people about the things they said they wouldn't do, such as no new and increased taxes, whereas under this Treasurer and this Premier, 26 times the Treasurer promised not to have new or increased taxes, but that promise was broken. We've also seen they're continuing to put taxes upon GP practices. At a time when GP practices are struggling, they're actually adding to that burden with taxes and haven't relented in that regard. They did back down on the renters' tax, but that was after a great battle to make them realise that taxing some of these very necessary private investment for housing wasn't going to help get more people into housing. So, at a time of record income and the sugar hit from high royalties, what's going to be the legacy? What will be the actual legacy? Well, a lot of the construction is in the outer years. It's certainly not now. It's not now when it's needed. And many of the projects are only in the planning stage, with the out years still to see substantive funding allocated. Meanwhile, the government wasted $200 million on the Wellcamp Quarantine Hub, which Queensland doesn't even own. And then the red carpet Premier, spent $64,000 on her cabinet Christmas party, $700 a minute for that little flash bash. Just shows you how out of touch this government is with priorities. They run expensive Chrissy parties while people are living in tents, and they've failed to meet the targets of what they said they'd do with housing. Now, I want to also talk about my electorate, and I certainly want to talk about the need for heavy rail to Maroochydore. The state government first said there would be a $6 million for a business case. Now we see in the Q-Trip there's a $14 million for a business case.
Pause the clock. Sorry, member from Maroochydore. Member for Logan. Member for Mermaid Beach. This is your final warning. CC cross-chamber chatter. Member from Maroochydore.
I'll start again. I want to talk about Maroochydore Rail because this government, at first, were spending $6 million on a planning or business study, and now they're talking about $14 million, but still no money allocated to put a shovel in the ground and get it started. We see another $50 million for another public transport study on the Sunshine Coast. So nearly $30 million for planning, business studies, and not a shovel in the ground, no deadlines, no timeframes and no commitment. Meanwhile, the concern is also the $1.6 billion that was allocated by the previous federal government, that was there under the current new federal government, is now potentially frozen while it's being reviewed. And we must see a commitment from this government not to just sink all its funds into wasteful projects that haven't been properly scoped, such as the Gabba rebuild at $2.7 billion. I'd like to see the business case on that. I'd like to see the value that's going to be added out of a $2.7 billion project, or better ways to achieve those facilities more cost-effectively. Release the business case on that, and then we might start to believe this government as to whether they really had a plan in the first place. But in regard to rail to Maroochydore, that corridor has been in place for a number of decades. It's time to get building, not to just shift the bulldust on this. It's time to make it happen, particularly with the 2032 deadline of the Olympics, and for growth into the future. No shovels in the ground, just more consultants, which is this Labor government's way, and no transparency about timeframes to unlock that. Cost of living, well, we've heard about the Callide coal-fired power station, the fact that the government misled the public about the impact that this would have upon electricity prices, and the fact that they also misled the public about the time that this key generator would be offline. I want to talk about Mooloolaba Harbour, because the harbour entrance is still unsafe. We still haven't seen what the permanent solution is that is going to be put in place from the government, and we haven't seen the community reference group convened by the government for something like 6 months. Meanwhile, once again, fishers are having their trawlers run aground, and boaties are saying to me, what is the government doing? They've gone silent on this. They've spent money on processes, but those processes have ground to a halt, and there's been no transparency when we must see the right permanent solution, the right transparency and engagement with community, not just hoping it will go away while lives are still at risk and will be at risk until the appropriate actions are taken. There's also the issue that we have with the M2M, which is the pedestrian and cycleway upgrades between Mooloolaba and Maroochydore, and this government is spending about $2 million on a planning study. And the Transport Minister promised the community when that project was redesigned that the money would remain. Well, it's nowhere in Q-Trip. Nowhere in Q-Trip. That is a broken promise. And there is a need to ensure that cyclists and pedestrians and all the users of that space are kept safe, and that the government, once again, just doesn't throw millions of dollars at planning studies that go nowhere, and don't address the issues that people have. So I want to see timely and appropriate spending on infrastructure to make sure the Sunshine Coast has the integrated public transport network they need. It's time for shovels in the ground to back rail to Maroochydore, to back an integrated public transport system, to ensure that we have the right services. The Health Minister says, there's no such thing as unfunded hospital beds, whereas I've heard that there could be as many as 70 beds that are still awaiting appropriate staffing at Sunshine Coast University Hospital. I've also had a cardiac patient, constituent, approach me who said his doctor had told him that he's on a backlog, he's beyond the clinical timeframes for his surgery because they haven't funded enough of the beds that should be available at Prince Charles Hospital. That's what he's been told. So apparently the Health Minister's got a different view, while patients are waiting far too long. They need to put the money at the front line of services rather than on their cabinet parties and wasteful, never-ending spending on their community consultation mates.